The sudden splash echoed across the stillness of the savannah, sharp and unexpected, followed by the unmistakable sound of frantic cries. The man, already on patrol near the water's edge, froze. His heart quickened with an instinctive recognition of danger. It was a sound that carried with it urgency, a cry too raw, too filled with distress to ignore. His gaze snapped toward the water, scanning the surface. There was nothing at first, only the rippling of the current. But then, as the wind shifted, the calls grew louder, more desperate, and it became clear the sound was that of a lion cub, young and terrified. The unmistakable plea echoed across the wide expanse of the savannah, each cry breaking through the silence. Without a second thought, the man dropped his gear, every instinct now focused on the life that needed saving. His breath steadied but quickened, the sharp urgency pressing against his chest. A cub stranded in the water was vulnerable to the current, to predators, to the harshness of the environment. It was too small, too helpless to survive long on its own. Every heartbeat seemed to quicken the need to act. He moved, his legs carrying him faster than he expected, the tall grasses brushing against his legs as he pushed forward. His mind raced, but his body moved with steady precision, each step closer to the source of the cries. When the man finally reached the water's edge, the sight before him stopped his breath. The cub, barely more than a few months old, was struggling to stay above the water. Its small body was slick with the current, and its paws paddled frantically, barely able to keep its head above the surface. The cries had softened, but they still carried the unmistakable sound of fear and exhaustion, each one filled with a plea for help. The man's heart tightened at the sight. The cub was far too small to survive on its own in these conditions. The water could pull it away at any moment, the strength of the current threatening to carry it further downstream. The distance between them seemed impossibly long, each second stretching into eternity. There was no time to waste. He waded into the water, his movements slow and deliberate, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of the environment. The cub's tiny body trembled with fear and exhaustion, its wide eyes locked on him, filled with a mix of confusion and terror. The man's pulse quickened as he moved closer, the weight of the situation pressing against him. He knew the fragility of life in the wild, how quickly things could turn. The current swirled around his legs, pulling at him, but he didn't hesitate. With each step, the space between them grew smaller, the fear in the cub's eyes more palpable. The man's mind focused on the task at hand. He had to save the cub. There was no alternative. As the man reached the cub, he extended a careful hand, his fingers brushing lightly against its slick body. The little one flinched, its small body jerking, back in fear, its eyes wide with confusion. For a moment, it hesitated, unsure of the human reaching toward it. But there was no time to reassure the cub with words or gestures. Every second counted. With a soft but firm movement, the man scooped the cub into his arms, lifting it from the water. Its tiny body shuddered against his chest, the trembling a mixture of exhaustion and fear. Its cries were softer now, the frantic edge slowly replaced by the quiet sobs of a creature too small to comprehend the safety it had just found. The man whispered gently, trying to calm the cub with his presence, but the sound of his voice was a distant echo to the drowning cub's panic. With the cub secured in his arms, the man carefully made his way back toward the shore. The water was colder now, and each step felt heavier, as though the weight of the situation was pressing in on him. His grip remained gentle, steady, He knew the real challenge was just beginning. The cub's survival was only part of the story. The bond, the trust, the delicate balance of nature and human intervention, it was all unfolding in this quiet, urgent moment. The man's every step was measured, as though the world around him had fallen silent, all attention focused on the small life he held in his arms. The man's breath came in shallow gasps as he made his way back toward the bank, the weight of the cub nestled in his arms, pressing heavily against his chest. The water was colder than he had anticipated, seeping through the fabric of his clothes, its chill a stark contrast to the warmth of the baby's fragile body. His steps were slow, careful. The last thing he needed was to lose his footing, to fall into the cold depths with the cub still so vulnerable in his arms. Each step felt like a silent prayer, a desperate plea for safety. The cub, small and trembling, pressed itself closer to him, seeking whatever comfort it could find in the man's hold. As he moved further from the shore, his mind raced. He was taking a risk, one that might be too great to bear. But there was no turning back now. Then, through the stillness of the savannah, a sound reached his ears. It was low, deep, almost imperceptible at first, but unmistakable. A growl, the rumble of a lioness's voice. His body froze, every muscle tensing, the weight of the moment settling heavy on his chest. The cub's tiny body stiffened in his arms, and the sound of its fearful whimper was like a warning that echoed through the stillness of the savannah. The man's heart hammered in his chest, loud against the tense quiet that seemed to hang in the air. He turned slightly, eyes scanning the area, desperate to place the source of the growl. His mind raced with the knowledge of the danger he had just put himself in. The lioness was near, too near for comfort. The growl came again, this time closer, a steady, rhythmic rumble that spoke of the power of the creature behind it. The man's stomach tightened in response, the realization settling in that he had crossed a line. He had taken the cub from the water, and now its mother was coming. The instinct to protect her young would drive her to do whatever it took. The tension in the air thickened as the man stood motionless, his hands trembling slightly, the cub still clutched tightly against him. Then, emerging from the shadows at the edge of the water, the lioness appeared. Her presence was unmistakable, a force of nature, both formidable and graceful. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto the man with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. There was no mistaking the suspicion in her gaze, no doubting the protective instinct that surged through her. Her body was poised, muscles taut like a coiled spring ready to react. The air between them was electric, thick with the weight of what was at stake. The man could feel the lioness's gaze cutting through him, a silent challenge that seemed to vibrate through the earth beneath his feet. The world seemed to stop. The only sound, the soft, shuddering breath of the cub in his arms. The lioness did not move immediately, but every step she took towards him made the air grow heavier, the tension more palpable. The man stood perfectly still, his own breath shallow, his heart racing. His mind screamed at him to retreat, to drop the cub and run, to escape the approaching danger. But the cub was still in his arms, its small, fragile body trembling against his chest. The man could not abandon it now. He had come too far to turn back. He could only wait, feeling the weight of the lioness's presence bearing down on him. He whispered softly, his voice barely audible over the rising tension. "It's okay, girl," he murmured. His words meant as much for himself as for the lioness. The lioness's ears flicked, her eyes narrowing slightly as if weighing his words. But she did not approach further. She stood there, her gaze fixed, silent, still calculating. The air was thick with the understanding that the balance between predator and protector was fragile, suspended in the quiet moments between them. Whatever would happen next, it would not be decided by force or by speed, but by the quiet decisions that both creatures would make in this suspended moment of time. The lioness remained poised, her eyes never leaving the man as she watched him, unwavering and full of quiet vigilance. The tension between them hung heavy in the air, an unspoken understanding of danger that neither could ignore. The man, holding the cub gently in his arms, dared not make a move, his body taut with anticipation. He could feel the weight of the moment in his chest, his every breath slow and measured. The lioness, despite her stillness, radiated an undeniable force, the kind of presence that reminded him of the wild's raw power. He knew the risk. At any moment she could lunge, and he would have no way to defend himself. But then, as if fate itself decided to offer him a reprieve, the lioness made a choice. She lowered her head, just enough to shift the balance of the encounter, her eyes softening not with trust, but with something more complex, an almost resigned understanding. The man remained frozen, unsure of the meaning behind this sudden gesture. His heart pounded in his chest, and the air between them seemed to stand still. The cub, still weak from its ordeal, gave a small, trembling sound in his arms, a noise filled with both exhaustion and a quiet yearning for its mother. The lioness shifted her weight slightly, her body coiled but no longer tense with immediate threat. Her gaze flickered between the man and the cub, her movements careful, deliberate. There was no sudden rush, no charge. Instead, the lioness moved with a grace that spoke volumes. Her decision, whatever it may be, was made not in haste, but in quiet reflection. It was as if she had recognized something deeper in the man, an understanding of the bond between her and her cub, and perhaps an acknowledgement of the man's role in this fragile moment. With a calm that surprised even him, the man lowered the cub to the ground, his hand steady but his heart racing. The cub gave a soft whimper as it touched the earth, its tiny legs still unsteady, still feeling the weight of its own fragility. The lioness never took her eyes off the man, her defensive stance still present but now tempered with something softer, something that gave the man the courage to let go. As the cub shifted slightly, hesitant but instinctively drawn to its mother, the lioness's attention shifted fully to the small creature, her body ready to act if needed, but, for now, waiting. The cub, with trembling legs, crawled toward its mother, its movements slow and unsure. The lioness's body remained taut with readiness, but as the cub finally made contact, nuzzling gently against her side, the tension began to dissolve. The lioness's muscles softened, her defensive posture relaxing as she welcomed the cub back into her embrace. There was no rush, no overwhelming display of affection. Instead, it was a slow, quiet reunion, the kind only a mother and her young could share. The cub nestled closer, and the lioness responded with a soft movement of her head, guiding the little one against her side, offering comfort in the simplest of ways. It was a powerful moment, yet one of profound gentleness, as the wild, unspoken bond between mother and child was reaffirmed. The man, still motionless, felt his chest loosen as he slowly began to step back. He did so cautiously, careful not to disturb the fragile balance between them. The lioness's gaze followed his every movement, but the tension had eased, replaced by something deeper, an understanding. He didn't hurry, taking small steps backward, not wanting to intrude upon the quiet reunion unfolding before him. As he moved away, he could hear the soft sounds of the cub nuzzling closer, the subtle noises of the mother's gentle touch as she reassured her baby. There was no aggression, no harshness, only the quiet rhythm of nature playing out in its most raw, instinctual form. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the man exhaled. His body relaxed, feeling the shift in the air as the danger faded. The bond between mother and cub had been restored, and in that simple, unspoken moment, the lioness had accepted him not as an adversary, but as part of the delicate balance of life in the wild. He stood in silence, watching as the mother and cub found comfort in one another, knowing that his role in this moment was complete. The lioness stood still for a moment longer, her amber eyes locked onto the man, unwavering and intense. There was no aggression, no fear, just a deep, quiet awareness. Her gaze, steady and calm, held a silent understanding, as if acknowledging the man's role in the fragile dance of life they had shared. The cub, now safely nestled back by its mother's side, took slow, trembling steps forward. Its tiny legs still wavered beneath it, but the weight of fear seemed to lift, replaced by something softer, a sense of relief, of safety. The man's heart pounded quietly in his chest, the tension of the past moments slowly ebbing away. He could feel the air around him shift, a peaceful calm settling over the savannah. The lioness turned her body slightly, her movements fluid and measured as she began to walk away. There was a quiet strength in the way she moved, an assurance that filled the space around her. Her powerful body, though still carrying the remnants of the struggle, seemed lighter now, as if the bond with her cub had been restored, and with it her own sense of peace. The cub, still cautious, followed closely behind. Its movements were slow, unsure, but there was an unmistakable shift, a quiet assurance born from its mother's presence. The pair moved together, the mother leading, the cub following, their forms blending into the golden grasses of the savannah. The man didn't move. He didn't call out. He simply stood still, a silent observer, allowing the lioness and her cub to walk away in their own time. There was no rush, no need for the man to intervene further. The lioness, with the weight of motherhood now evident in every step, led her cub into the vastness of the land. Her body, regal and powerful, slowly became one with the landscape, her silhouette fading into the tall grass. The cub, still small and fragile, followed the rhythm of its mother, its tiny body moving in sync with the larger, more confident figure ahead. The man remained where he stood, watching quietly as the pair disappeared from view. There was no fanfare, no dramatic gesture, just the simple, steady movements of a mother guiding her young, a reminder of the wild's ancient pulse, timeless and enduring. The savannah seemed to exhale with them, the winds gently stirring the grasses in a soft, almost reverent embrace. The moment stretched on, filling the space with a quiet sense of awe, as if nature itself had paused to honor what had just transpired. The weight of the moment settled heavily in the man's chest. He had risked much, his safety, his well-being, for the sake of this fragile life. But as he stood there, his heart full, he realized that what he had witnessed was far greater than any single act of rescue. It was the natural cycle of life unfolding before him, the protection of a mother, the vulnerability of a child, and the profound respect that passed between them. There was no triumph here, no victory to claim, just a quiet acknowledgement that he had played his part, that the wild had taken its course. The lioness and her cub, now a part of the savannah once more, had faded from view. But the man's heart swelled with gratitude. It wasn't just for what he had done, but for what he had been allowed to witness. The savannah, with all its beauty and danger, had a rhythm of its own, and for a brief moment, the man had been allowed to witness that rhythm up close. He turned slowly, his footsteps deliberate and steady. The memory of that quiet exchange, of the lioness and her cub, stayed with him as he walked away, a quiet peace accompanying him. As the grasses whispered around him, he knew that the savannah had carried on, as it always had, with the lioness and her cub now reunited, a part of the land once more. The sun was low on the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the savannah as the man began to walk away from the water's edge. His steps were slow, each one measured, as he turned his head to glance back toward the place where the lioness and her cub had just disappeared. The air, once tense with the weight of the moment, had softened into a quiet calm. The cub was safe, the lioness had returned to her young, and the delicate balance of the wild had been restored. There was no drama in the parting, no loud farewells, just the quiet understanding that nature had once again found its way. The vast savannah stretched out before him, the earth breathing softly in sync with the rhythm of the wind. It carried with it the faint, almost imperceptible sounds of the wild, the distant call of a bird, the rustling of the long grasses swaying with the breeze. The man's breath deepened as he exhaled, the sense of relief and gratitude filling his chest. He could still feel the weight of the lioness's trust, her calm acceptance as she allowed him to aid her and her cub. In that trust, he had seen the wild's resilience, its ability to forgive and endure, even in the face of danger. There were no words to capture it, no grand gestures to be made, only this quiet, shared understanding. As the man continued walking, his pace unwavering, the savannah around him seemed to exhale along with him, the land carrying the stillness of the moment. The lioness and her cub, though now gone, had left behind something profound, a reminder of the delicate dance between life and survival. The fading light from the setting sun painted the grasses in hues of gold and orange, casting long shadows across the earth. The wind whispered through the grass, as if the land itself was speaking in a language only the wild could understand. He reached the edge of the savannah and paused again, allowing his eyes to drift over the horizon where the lioness and her cub had vanished. The sight of the endless, open plains stretched before him, the world both vast and intimate, holding the quiet promise of life continuing. The man stood still, letting the silence wrap around him, feeling the weight of the moment settle in his chest. It wasn't an end, not truly. The lioness and her cub had returned to their world, and that was enough. The wild, in all its raw beauty, had been made stronger by their survival. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, the soft winds carrying with them the quiet sounds of the savannah, as though the earth was holding the moment just as the man did in his heart. The lioness and her cub, though no longer in view, remained with him, woven into the fabric of the wild where they truly belonged. And as the last light of the day slipped beneath the horizon, the man took another deep breath, feeling the profound connection to the untamed beauty of the land, a connection that would stay with him long after he left the savannah behind. There was no need for words, no need for more than this, just the quiet peace that comes from knowing the wild is stronger for their survival.